It is Runtime. I'm Caleb Friesen, your host, and this is the daily show for Indian tech. Today, my guest is Anjali Sardana. She is the founder and CEO of Pronto, which is a company that is basically making instant cleaning a reality here in India. And Anjali, you just raised an $11.25 million Series A round. This round was co-led by General Catalyst and Glade Brook Capital Partners, with participation from Bain Capital Partners as well. Congratulations on the round, first of all.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to know, people can probably already tell from your accent that you're actually from the States, right? But you're starting this company in India. That's the first question that I had. I was just wondering, why did you decide to come back to India? I know you were from the States originally, but I think your family is originally from India, right?
Yes, yeah. My extended family lives in GK in Delhi. So That's why we also started in Gurugram and not in Bangalore.
Okay. So I just wanted to know then, why not start something like Pronto in the States, for example?
Well, I think this is like a ludicrous proposition to start this in the States. It doesn't work for many reasons. I think to break it down, one is that I think unit econ would be intractable in the US. I think one of the things I think a lot about is, DoorDash, fantastically well-run business, but has struggled to become profitable. And reason being, your ticket size is, your average ticket size on DoorDash might be $35, but your cost of service ends up being, like $34 or $36 or $40. And here your ticket size is lower, but your cost of service is disproportionately lower. And thus the absolute value in terms of profit per transaction or gross margin per transaction becomes higher. And so I think, and then the other thing is like the sheer number of consumers in India is like bigger, and therefore smaller ticket size but higher spread times more transactions ends up with more profitable. And so I think your unit econ in the US ends up being usually quite negative, and that's the reason why a business like GoPuff would never work, or will never become profitable. And I think the other thing is that you don't have demand density in the same way there, right? So there are very few places in the US that are as dense as, most places in Gurgaon or Delhi, right? And so I think you have downtown Manhattan is pretty much where you'll be able to service, or just New York City. But the problem then is that as soon as you leave New York, you don't have a market. But even then, if you think about concentration, so what percent of people in New York are going to be interested in these services is going to be lower, because it's culturally not a thing to have. At least the culture of house help is not really a thing in the US, where only super rich people will have it. And even the average upper middle class person wouldn't even think about having house help, versus every middle class, upper middle class person in India who can afford it uses house help services. And so I think even where you have demand density, you won't see the same concentration of demand among the people who live there. And so I think for a number of reasons, it doesn't really make sense to start this. And the other thing is, in terms of demand density, once you leave the cities, in the suburbs, essentially the equivalent of the suburbs in India is still super dense, and you still have really large societies where you go to DLF Pravana, where there is a ton of empty land, and then you have a really large society where you can create a ton of demand density because there's that one society, even though it's in the middle of nowhere. Versus kind of if you go in the suburbs in the US, it's house and then ton of grass and then another house. And so even outside the cities, you aren't able to outside the cities, it's just completely intractable to build any sort of demand density.
Makes sense. And yeah, the model that you're following is sort of, the way I think of it at least, is like a dark store model. I know you probably don't use that term internally, but proximity is really important, right? So having this hub and spoke model where you have a central place where all of the cleaners and housekeepers stay, and then they're able to very quickly service customers that are very close to that location. Another question that I have, though, you started this in October of 2024. At that point, there were already at least a handful of companies that would be considered incumbents specifically in this space, right? Some that had been around for quite a while, others that were relatively new. So I guess looking at this opportunity from, I think at that point, the States, maybe before October of 2024, a lot of people would have looked in from the outside and thought, well, there's already, this space is already kind of heating up. Do I really want to get into this and start competing with all these other companies? Did that thought cross your mind? And if it did, why did you decide to just go ahead with it anyways?
Is no, for two reasons. I'd push back on the point that they were already incumbents. I think that's even today a ludicrous statement, because like given the scale at October 2023, I don't think even one of the players was even doing this model at that point. I think they pivoted, and so they weren't even doing this. And the other player, I don't think had even started operating. So I think in October 2024, people were starting to work on it, but I don't think any of the players that exist today were actually operating. So I would push back on that. And I did a lot of research to figure out if there were people doing this, and I couldn't find anyone. So if there was someone doing it, they're operating at such small scale or in stealth. And so I think that's pretty irrelevant. And even today, I do think there's a barrier to entry now, which is capital. It's a very capital intensive business at this point in time. But in terms of scale, I don't think anyone is like run away with the market, or like it's like the penetration is so low today. It's like a massively greenfield market. I think it's like in October 2024, especially a ludicrous thing to say that there were already incumbents and I should have been scared off. I think also like I had thought of the idea in December 2023, and that's when the obsession started. And it was never going to leave my mind until then. And no one was working on it in December 2023. I mean, like no one even had the idea then. So I think it took me. I started working on it in July. I just said October because when I was leaving Bain Capital, I had like technically started working there in July as well. And then the partners were like, "Oh, did you already know you were going to leave and start this, and you were working on it the entire time you were here?" And I couldn't say yes because like that would have made me look really bad. So I just said no. I started working on it in October, and I just like made up October. But then at that point, I was like, "Well, I can't say July on my LinkedIn. Like I have to say October because they're gonna check." And so then I just put October. Like that's like that, so it's fake. But I think for me, like I don't really care if anyone else is doing this or not. I was going to do this anyways, right? And so like I was so deeply obsessed with the idea. I think I even wrote about this in my post. Like I was so deeply obsessed with the idea I couldn't do anything else, right? Like I had to build this company or I wasn't going to be able to live. And so to me it's irrelevant if I'm the only one doing it or there's 1,000 other companies doing it. I'm going to do it.
Wow. What was it that made you, beyond just the opportunity itself, looking at the data, analyzing trends, what was it about the idea that resonated with you personally as a founder?
Yeah, I think there were a couple things here. One is that I am someone who's always been very interested in labor markets, in part because it's like a combination of human psychology and just like typical supply demand, economic markets. So always very interested in that. I'm also someone who's very, very bothered by inefficiencies. It's like if I see something being done in an inefficient way or like some system is broken, I get very irritated by it. And I'm like, there has to be a better way. Like this has to be done, like more efficiently. And so I think labor market inefficiencies happen to be this, exact, intersection of it. But normally I think about this market in particular, I think one of the things about inefficiencies is that usually there's some party that benefits from this inefficiency, right? Like there's a market inefficiency and one player can arbitrage it and like profit from it. I think this in particular is a labor market inefficiency where no one benefits. Like neither the consumer nor the like worker benefits from this inefficiency. Both suffer. That really struck me, right? Like I think it's like very like it was just something I was so passionate about and also was so glaring where like there should be no reason why this isn't done better. If no party is benefiting from it and no party has a vested interest in inefficiency continuing to persist, like this should be fixed. That plus, I think this was a problem that always bothered me. Growing up, our house help would leave often. My brothers and I were like actually we would terrorize the house help because we were menaces. So they would quit often, and then my mom would be thrown into this like 4 to 5 month cycle of trying to find someone new. And she worked our entire life. Like she went back to work like 2 weeks after I was born. And so I think it was always very tough on her. And I saw that. And then in addition, I just thought it was very, very odd how every other part of life had become so convenient, right? Like everything was delivered in 8 minutes. But like getting, someone to come clean your house, like you have to call 20 people off of My Gate or ask, the guards at your society for a list of phone numbers. And it's just very painful. And it made no sense to me. So I think broadly, a lot of things came together where I knew this was a problem I had to solve. And then once I did, or like once I thought of the idea and like how I was going to solve it, I just couldn't let go of it.
I completely agree. I think the opportunity is clear. I'm sure at various points throughout time, there have been people who have tried to solve this and just were not able to because of lack of access to capital, for example, or maybe they just gave up because it is such an operationally complex problem to solve. But I personally have also had various people in my family who have been coming in and helping. And when they leave, or when we leave, me and my family, it's always hard to find someone new. And even now, I think you're talking about you growing up, my son has seen like three or four different helpers now throughout his life. He's like not even 2 years old yet. And and he gets attached to these people, right? And then they move on. And so I think it makes perfect sense for this to be instant, 10-minute, a little bit less personal, right? Like you kind of want a little bit of that distance when it's a stranger who's coming into your house and sort of helping out. But I also think that this is a problem not just in India, but also in many countries in Asia, right? Like Singapore would be a great market. I think there's a lot of places in the Middle East. Have you, even like Thailand and Malaysia, and right? Have you thought about? It's very early days, obviously, for Pronto, but I'd love to know how you're imagining this company in, say, a decade. What would you like it to be in 10 years?
Yeah, I'd say two things here. One is I'm not ruling out international expansion, like definitely a thing that we can do in the future. I think that India is the right place to be starting, and for many reasons. I don't know that I would go start a company in Thailand. I know nothing about Thailand, and that's actually part of it, which is I think in this business in particular, it's so personal. Someone's coming into your home, performing, like something that people consider a necessity, and it's a very personal service. And for 30 minutes to 2 hours, this person's in your space, right? And so I think on both the supply and demand side, there are very local nuances, both city to city or even within a city, like micro market to micro market. And so I think that when you move to Thailand or like one of these other countries in Southeast Asia or the Middle East, you have to be super, super, super aware of what you're getting into. And I know a lot of companies try to expand into the Middle East, and it's just a very different dynamic there, very different consumer patterns there. And so, I mean, maybe we'll get to that eventually. I don't know. I'm not ruling it out, but I do think there's going to be a lot of local nuances, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some countries that are completely, impassable. Like we aren't able to crack those markets. Second, I'd say is that I think the vision for Pronto is much broader and much more tied to India, though. I think I wrote about this in my post, which is like I think the 30-year vision for Pronto isn't to expand across home services necessarily. Right? The vision for Pronto is to formalize and organize all unskilled informal labor in India. And why is that? I think that one of the things I think a lot about is so right now our consumers are really, really high expectation. Everything must be delivered in 8 minutes. I have money to spend. Like it must be perfect. I'm a really busy corporate person. And the service providers wouldn't necessarily be able to meet those expectations on their own. Like how would they show up in 10 minutes, right? And so we do all the operations work that bridges that gap, right? And so I think that's where we get, where the margin comes in, where it's like your margin is related to your economic value add. And here we have like a really high economic value add where, we're taking the lever that and helping kind of, we're providing the structure in order to meet the expectations of the consumers. And then we're providing the incentives for the workers to stay in that structure. And I think that is more of what the vision I have for Pronto, which is, expanding across, segments of the economy in India and, stuff like manufacturing and selling to, but particularly selling to SMBs. So reason being, I think if you're a really large company or a really large manufacturer, you end up using like a top of funnel, like labor source provider. So for example, a Shadowfax or a Vahan. And what these companies do is they're essentially just bring in the top of funnel leads. And then these companies do all the structuring and providing them incentives to stay in the structure on their own, which means the value add of, a Shadowfax or Vahan is quite low. And therefore your margins end up being lower. I think I want to be in a position where we are doing that structuring and we are doing the incentives to stay in the structure part of it, because that's where you can maintain really, large margins. And so I think that's why it's important to be selling to SMBs and not to really large companies. But yeah, I mean, I think the vision for Pronto, it could include geo expanding outside of India with the same set of services we have today, or like a slightly more expanded home services offering, or it could be both, expanding, across sectors of the economy in India. And I think the latter is more likely what we'll end up doing, because at least that's my vision today. And I think my vision for the company is very tied to India.
So you've been now officially, right, if we're thinking of October as the starting date, you've been running Pronto for about 10 months now. And having lived for a very large majority, I think the entirety of your life in the States, and now coming to India to start a business, what are your impressions, and an operationally complex business at that, what are your impressions of just, like starting a company and running a startup here in India? What has the experience been like for you?
So people ask me this. I didn't run a company in the US. Therefore, I have no reference point. This is the only time I've ever run a company, and therefore this is the only environment in which I've ever run a company, and therefore this is what's normal to me. Like the baseline is this. I would say that, like, I do think the style of working a lot of times with external parties is very different in the US versus India, right? Like, you have to really push vendors and nag them to get them to do what they're supposed to do on time, right? Like, it's like, you have to be very, very persistent in following up, and a lot of times people don't follow through with what they say they will, or at least on time. And versus, a lot of times in the US, at least when my very short amount of work experience, it was a very different working culture. And so but I also think it was in part like where I worked in the US and who I interacted with, which was like, I worked at a private equity firm, and I was the only external parties I ever interacted with were like service providers who were expert networks and, like Bain consultants. So like that's like a very different vendor to be interacting with than your like pole kiosk vendor in Gurugram, which is like obviously a very different like profile of person. And so I think, like, when people ask me like, how do you adjust to running a company here? Well, I didn't run a company anywhere else, so this is it.
Do you think that your background as someone who's spent their life in the States, do you think that has sort of influenced the way you look at business and the way that you run Pronto? I mean, I've sat down with a number of American founders, Matt from Blue Tokai, Bert from California Burrito. I've talked to Spencer from Commenda, and I love the way he runs his company as well. So a lot of these American influences resonate with me, right, as a Canadian. How do you see your sort of American side influencing how you run your company?
There is definitely a lot of things. One is that I bring the like Bain Capital American style of work and execution in terms of my hiring, and in terms of what I tolerate from people who work for me, which is to say, the experience that people have with their vendors here, or like that we have with our vendors, is not the experience that I want people to have working with others internally, if that makes sense. So like at Bain Capital, you are told to do something and you do it on time, and it's 100% done when you do it. And like that's the expectation. And anything less than that is like not acceptable. And so I think that like the same like moving timelines and like, things are like half done, like that is not something I accept. And so I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I think the speed of execution. A lot of times I see companies in India that are a little bit more lethargic. And I think that for me, like, speed is super, super important. And so speed of execution is something that I hold to be like super, super important within our internal culture. But yeah, I didn't run a company in the US. So this was just based on my like very limited work experience, right? And like even then, like it was like 6 months of full-time work experience during which I was already working on this the entire time. So like, and I don't know, I haven't really worked very much outside of Pronto.
So you're 22, right?
I turned 23.
23. Okay, so you're 23 years old. You've raised over 100 crore rupees from some of the best investors out there. What's your advice to young founders who want to build and grow a venture-backed company at a young age?
I feel unqualified to answer this. I mean, I think everyone's journey is very different, and you just have to start doing. That's the one piece of advice I can give, which is just start doing. No one's going to like give a company to you on a silver platter. And also, there's no like perfect time to start. Like if you're waiting until you feel qualified to start, or like the right time to start, like it'll never come. You need to just start. I think I don't think the goal should be I want to start a venture-backed company. I think the goal should be I want to solve this problem. That's my like 2 cents. And if the answer to solving that problem is a venture-backed company, like great, then you should start that. But if it's not, then like maybe don't. I don't know. But I feel unqualified to answer this because I've only done it once, and therefore, and I'm at a state. I'm like Series A company, not Series F or something. So I can't even call it like a success at this point.
Well, let's see. I think the space is going to continue to heat up, and there will be more competition. So, and it's also very capital intensive as a business. So there will be rounds in the future. But then maybe a better question would be to just focus on your individual scenario. What were some of the things that you did to get these investors on board quickly and help them to understand the mission and the vision? Because again, 10 months to Series A and that to $11.25 million in India, I think it's an accomplishment, right? And it's something that a lot of people look at and think, wow, like that's quite a bit of money in a very short span of time. How did you pull that off?
Yeah, by the way, in my head, so we were not, I'll clarify what like the first 6 of the 10 months you're referring to is, which is like me and one guy who's on my ops team. We were just like messing around, like not messing around, but like we were operating out of a park in Gurugram, and like I was like vibe coding in Cursor, or the app that was on the App Store, and like it was just like we were figuring things out.
What is this park, by the way? I saw this in your LinkedIn post where you're like, we're operating out of a playground, and I was like, are you talking about a real playground?
Yeah, so it's next to Huda Market in Sector 56, Gurugram. You can go there. It's near the Beaten Cafe, if you know where that is, which unlikely. So I mean, like it was a real park. We were just trying to figure things out. We had on any given day, we had 150 customers and three partners. So we had like a 95% cancellation rate that we were canceling. In fact, it got so bad that we would like square off customers and be like justify to us why we should use like the partner to come service your house. So it was just like ridiculous, but it was a lot of just iterating on the business model, figuring things out. I think that was helpful for us, right? Like I think that was important for us to know that information, and it basically formed the business model that Pronto still uses today, right? And was very, very helpful for when we launched on April 1st as Pronto. But we were like operating under a throwaway name, and like the scale was so small that like truly the investors did not care about that, right? At least, so I'll talk about our 2 rounds. One was the BCV led round, which was we raised in February, and the second round was this Glade Brook General Catalyst one where we signed the term sheet in first week of May, right? So I think for the first round, they like truly didn't care about like quote unquote traction or really anything. I'm told that I got on the meeting with them and they decided in 15 minutes that they were going to write the term sheet. And then they gave me the term sheet like 3 days later. So like, I think they really didn't care. They were just like, oh, founder plus big market. And this is their first India investment is Pronto. They've invested in one more company, which is like the Palantir JV, but nothing since then. But I think like, and they want to do more India. They just are still looking. I don't think that like, what did I do to convince them? I'm actually not sure. I just started talking, and then I guess they decided to write the term sheet. I'm like genuinely unsure. The second round, so we launched April 1st, and the raise started like 3.5, 4 weeks later. Actually, actually it was sparked by an intro made by our dear friend Aryaman. He introed me to a fund, and I was like, oh. I agreed to the intro, thinking I could push it out like a couple of weeks, and then he's like, "Oh, actually, like you should. It will look bad. You should meet them now." And then that kicked off the raise. So the timing was actually driven by him, and so that raise also happened very quickly. And what did I do to convince the investors? Again, I'm told it was like I just talked, and they're like, "Okay, yeah, we'll write the term sheet." That plus we had like 4 weeks of data. But what is 4 weeks of data? Like 4 weeks of data doesn't mean much. In fact, General Catalyst never asked for the data. They didn't look at it. They never asked for it. Glade Brook did, and they looked at it. They came, and basically all of them just came to visit and talk to me, saw our operations, and then wrote the check. I like can't really say like what did you do to convince them? Like I'm not really sure. I just started talking, and they gave me money. So like that was it.
I'm just curious though, and by the way, sorry, my son is here in the background. He snuck away, but I just wanted to know, why hadn't anyone done this up until this point? Instant home cleaning services, like again, in 10 minutes or less. Even in the beginning of this conversation, you were describing how you, at least from your point of view, and I think I would agree with you, probably a lot of the competitors have sort of pivoted since seeing what you've been doing. Why hadn't this happened before?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things. If you refer to the people who tried this in, let's say, 2015, 2016, key reason it didn't work was mobile phone penetration was too low, right? Like if you tried this pre 2019, 2020, it wouldn't have been possible because the like supply on the platform wouldn't have a cell phone. Like Uber, when they launched in India, had to give out iPhones, right? Because no one had a phone. And so like basically, you know, I think that's a key reason why all those early players failed. The second is that the business model. So like you wouldn't want an Uber driver to come inside your house, right? Like this person's going to come inside your home for like 30 minutes to 2 hours. And so like there's a different bar for quality, safety, reliability that, you know, that customers expect here. And that requires a much more intensive business model where you have I guess you need to have much more observability over the labor supply chain end to end. So that means like we own recruiting, onboarding, training, performance management, quality assurance, all on our own. And then the reliability piece is on our last mile ops, right? And so like that's like it's essentially like the last mile ops of a quick commerce company, in addition to the entire labor supply chain that we have to own and do all the ops for. And that's way more operationally intensive than I think most people want to take on. And so I think from what I saw, a lot of the people who tried it tried either some sort of hybrid in between an Uber type matching platform and this, or just like fully an Uber type matching platform. And that fundamentally doesn't work in this market. You need to take like the right tail extreme, operationally intensive, like you own every part of it version of the business model in order to make it work. Anything else really doesn't meet the mark for consumers. And people really do have high expectations here.
They do, yeah, and the expectation, especially when it comes to speed, is becoming higher and higher by the day. Just as an example here, I've got my sort of printout of the questions that I wanted to ask you, right? And Swiggy Instamart dropped the ball. It was raining a little bit, and so they canceled the order. Blinkit was able to get it to me, but it took way longer than their estimated amount of time. And so for me, right, I'm prepping for this conversation. I need this thing to come like very quickly. My expectation is extremely high. And when they drop the ball, I'm used to now Instamart and Blinkit and all of these very rapid, at least when it comes to food and grocery deliveries, right? And so I think that's going to start trickling into other sectors and segments as well, like the cleaning market. One other question that I had though, what is like you as a founder, right? You're young, you've been sort of running this business for a very short amount of time. I'm guessing there have been some very challenging moments in the journey. So for you, what has been one of the hardest decisions that you've had to make so far?
Oh, there's so many challenging moments. I think when you're dealing with the supply side, there's so much nuance. Like there's always essentially tension between like who to prioritize and how to navigate situations. And like almost always, basically, I guess without getting like too specific, but sometimes you basically have to decide like who's going to like who has to win in this situation, or like who you end up favoring. And I think it's tough, but the only answer can be the supply side in this market. And it's like really tough as a founder to be like, you know what, actually, we are going to take like normally we do like X number of bookings per day, but in order to resolve this situation on the supply side, we are going to cap our number of bookings at X divided by 4. So like a 75% week over week like decrease, and just like cap it at that so we can resolve the issues and then like get back to operation. So you take like the short-term pain on that side in order to like essentially fix the issues on the supply side. And like this is like very much a thing you have to do in this business in particular, right? Like I think I interviewed a lot of people for operations senior roles, and one of the things is like people who talk about like, oh, you can always bring in like alternative supply or something like that, like because it's very much a thing in like Blinkit and Swiggy. I guess you can you know get riders from Zip or something like that. But that isn't how this works here, right? Like it's a lot more difficult, right? And our supply is like goes through a 5-day training process and background checks and all of these things that we own in house. And so like the speed to onboarding a person, there's a significant lag time. And I think the other tough choice is like, do you take a shortcut there? Do you say like, oh, this person, I'll pass them in like a day or two, and then we can fix our issues and like if serve more demand, all of this. If we're being supply constrained, let's just pass people really quickly, and then we'll get more people on the platform and we're good. And I think that's the tough choice. Where a lot of times you end up where like, oh, do we try and do that and be able to serve demand, or do we just make the hard choice of saying like, no, we're not compromising on quality? And for me, I think we never compromise on that. Reason being, I think it is way first on like a very pragmatic level. Like I think it's way worse to serve someone and for them to have a poor experience than to just not serve them at all. So just don't serve them at all. But also I think long term, the only thing that will kill you as a business is poor quality and poor reliability, right? And so those two things are super important for us. And we've gone through a lot of ups and downs with that, right? Like I'll say like Rocky was very rough for us, right? We were kind of prepared for that. And like for us, that's like the most we know though when these are the issues, and like I think it's about fixing them and iterating on operations and always making the tough choice to cap the number of bookings in order to make sure you're still providing the service that you should be.
And coming back to this printout analogy, right? It actually would have been, on Swiggy's part, it would have been more honest and for me more customer centric if they had just said, look, we can't, like it was written 4 minutes, right? That was the estimated time. And so I clicked on that thinking, great, I'm going to get my printout in 4 minutes. And then it took 10 minutes and then 15 minutes. And then they said, actually, sorry, we've canceled your order. And so for me, that's a much worse experience than if they had just said, look, we can't get it to you. And we know that because we're perfectionists, right? And so we're sort of looking at the data here. We see that it's raining, there's a lot of demand, et cetera, et cetera. We're just not going to be able to do it. Then I would have been like, great, I will find another solution, right? For myself as a customer, I'll go find someone with a printer, or I'll go to Blinkit or some other offering, right? And so I think what you're describing makes perfect sense. And yet it's so uncommon.
I actually don't think it's that easy though. Like I will defend them and be like, it was probably like they probably, if they knew they weren't going to be able to serve it, they probably would have stopped you from booking it. But I think it's like a little bit tougher than meets the eye. You should do it and do everything possible to make sure that you're not taking anything bookings or like I guess printout orders that you shouldn't be in. Like, but you don't have perfect visibility always, and so like stuff happens is what so I'll defend them slightly and be like it's they probably are trying to do that and just like failed in this instance, and that happens with us all the time, and like we are working tirelessly to like improve our systems to make sure that happens less often. But I think you see it across every platform because and the thing is also there isn't any like global comp to be able to like really rip this off of, which is to say like quick commerce is like very nascent in every place other than India. And so like there isn't like a rip and replace situation, like serviceability essentially on the back end. And so you can end up in these situations. And like I doubt Swiggy approached this with malice, where they said, oh, I'd like to take his money for the printout and then not service him and give him a poor experience. Like I'm sure they are kicking themselves too for this, but it's like something that we are striving towards, and it's very, very important to do, and like something that we are investing a lot in. But I also understand that like and Swiggy should be like really good at this because they're a really big company and they have a lot of money to spend. But like it happens.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate your point of view. I do think though, one of the benefits that you have at Pronto is that you're building this company from the ground up with these values of sort of being, you're never going to be perfect. You were even describing in the playground days how frequently things would go sideways, and that's just part of building a startup. But I also think, if it's part of your DNA, you're going to sort of almost the sort of, I don't know, it'll just sort of change how things happen, right? And yes, Swiggy might get more rejections, or they will reject their customers more frequently, rather than sort of making a promise that they can't keep. But just for me as a person, as a Canadian living in India for the last like 8+ years, it's something that I've encountered very frequently, where there is this promise of, hey, I'll be there in 2 minutes, I'll be there in 5 minutes, and it takes 15 minutes or it takes like an hour, right? And it just happens so often. And if that happened to me in Canada, or if that happened to me like in the States, for example, I think I would be a lot more like shocked and offended, right?
Yeah.
I'd be like, whoa, like what's going on here? Like, is your company like collapsing? But
Yeah.
here in India, it's just like, oh, well, I guess that's just how it is.
I think some companies also don't really make an effort, where like they just say, like, there is like one quick commerce company which I use like extremely infrequently, but the one time I tried it, it said 4 minutes, and then I ordered and it immediately said 18 minutes. And I'm like, then why did you say 4 minutes? Like, just you could have just said 18 minutes and I wouldn't have ordered. Like,
It
why
was
did
to
you?
convince you to order, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's very dishonest. I mean, you shouldn't do that. That I agree. It's very bad. And so I think there are companies who are trying. I actually think Swiggy is like probably one of the ones that is trying to like not lie to people. But I think there are companies who also don't make an effort. You are right. I also think this is like culturally a thing where people say, like, I get annoyed at my like team, and I try to get them to not do this, which is like they'll tell me, oh, I'm just like 5 to 10 minutes away. And I'm like, okay, where are you currently? And they're like, somewhere that's like clearly 30 minutes away. I'm like, then don't say 5 to 10 minutes. You're 30 minutes away. And I'm like, I'm a very punctual person. In fact, like, you know, if you're on time, you're late, sort of person. So it really bothers me, actually. But I mean, I'd say there's two segments to the market: people that are trying to be honest and actually kick themselves when they miss this, and people who say 4 minutes and then immediately say 18 minutes after you order, because that you're not even trying. Then you're actually doing it on purpose.
Yeah, I think we've got companies in both camps. Earlier you were talking about the supply side, and I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit. Just explain to me how Pronto's full stack model works. You can be as honest or as secretive about that as you want. I'm sure there's some competitive secrets here that you don't want to reveal, but just break it down for me. How does it function?
Yeah. So first, top of funnel is recruiting, which we have an in-house team who does this, and so they go into the kind of different areas and recruit people. And then we have batches. So they'll show up at the training center, which we have on certain days. And then there are screeners. So the trainers take a batch and screen them. And then people who pass, and that's actually a pretty low pass rate. It'll be like, if 300 people show up for screening, 50 of them pass, if that. And then they enter the training program. And then it's 5 days of quite rigorous training. And then there's on the 5th day, there's like a final exam, essentially. And they either pass or don't. In parallel, all their documents have been collected, and we're running a background check so that by the time they graduate, they're ready to go, given a uniform, and then they're assigned to a hub. And then once they're in the pool is when performance management starts. So post them joining, there's like a 60-day hand-holding period where like they're very in close contact with their trainer who trained them specifically. And so there's that 60-day hand-holding period. And then post that, they are still in contact with the trainers. And so, you know, we say, like, if there's any sort of, you know, complaint about quality, so like this person didn't know how to do this, or this person, you know, left watermarks on this thing, or like there were streaks after they like mopped this, right? Then that person gets sent for retraining. So a trainer will call them back to the training center. They'll take half a day or a day to get retrained on that specific skill, and then they re-enter. And then if there's essentially, like, if you get 2 quality strikes, then you get you're stopped from checking in and you're sent to the retraining. And then after the 3rd, then you're kind of offboarded off the platform. And so I think it's kind of like a 3-strike thing. But I think we do everything possible to retrain people. One of the things that we see is that, like, of the 14 services we offer, obviously it's like a very Pareto thing. Like 80% of bookings are for like the same 20% of services, which means that you have services that are not as commonly booked, and then some of them are like slightly more complicated, and therefore people forget how to do them. And that's the really tricky thing, where like you're continuously running retraining sessions on specific services and skills, because people just tend to forget them, and I can't really fault them. And so I think, in addition to the hard skills, our training program also covers soft skills: hygiene, grooming, uniform expectations, essentially, and then like training on the tech as well. And so I think we have a great training team. Like our training team is amazing, and I think they do a lot of really, really hard work to keep the organization up to standard.
You mentioned the tech there at the end, and I wanted to know. So it sounds like there's obviously two sides of the tech. One is the sort of the customer facing side. One is the cleaner and housekeeping facing side. Probably there's other parts of it as well. So just also help me to understand what happens in the back end to like actually make this whole thing work from a tech perspective.
I'll answer this question in 2 months, which is to say, our speed of tech development is like extremely fast, like shipping like 2 to 3 times a day. I'd say pre our Series A, we had like zero tech. Like there was actually nothing. You'd submit a booking on the app that hardly worked, and then like that was it. That was all the tech. It'd show up in a Slack, and then everything else was manual. And like everything else was maintained in Google Sheets and all of this. Like there was no like dashboards, nothing. And then post that, we hired someone who's joining a CTO, and he hired the whole engineering team. And now our like speed of tech development is like insane. And so our product on both the customer side and the operations side and the partner side is all changing very fast. And so I will update you in 2 months on what exactly the tech looks like. But I'd actually say there's 3 sides to the tech, which is customer, partner, and operations tech. So like the hub workers and the cluster managers, and like essentially, well, yeah, we have like this typical hub and then cluster manager, and so there's different levels of tech there. There's different dashboards now. So I will answer this question in 2 months.
Sounds good. I'll have you on in 2 months and we can talk about it. Why did you choose to do a hub model versus doing something that was a little bit more distributed? Like for example, when I order an Uber, right? It's just like they're just finding the nearest Uber to me and they're bringing that person to me. And I think housekeepers and cleaners, like they're also distributed, right? You might actually have people who are spread out across the city, not clustered into certain neighborhoods. So why did you choose to do the hub model instead of the distributed model?
I think if you want to do 10 minutes or less, it's very difficult to do it with free floating supply, which is to say you need optimal positioning of your supply in order to hit it, because essentially you have your polygon and everywhere in the polygon can be reached in 10 minutes. But then let's say you're like, it's a free floating supply model and it happens to be where it's not, distributed in a way that you can reach every single location in 10 minutes, or like not in a way that's like, or like, let's say you have 2 people on one side of the polygon and then another like 48 people on the other side. And then you get 3 bookings from one side of the polygon. Now it's 20 minutes to get from one end of the polygon to the other, right? And then you're not going to be able to service it in 10 minutes. I think if you want to do 10 minutes or less, you have to have optimal positioning of your supply. And the other thing is like, where would they stay? Like we had this problem when we were operating the park. Like no one wants to just like hang out in a park all day. Like that's not a good experience for the worker. Like essentially, like, if they're not working, they want to be in somewhere that's inside and comfortable and they aren't being harassed, because the reality is like where like your customer and your workers aren't usually like co-located in terms of where they reside, right? And honestly, like it's a very bad, unfortunate part of Indian culture, but like people are like very unfriendly to like the working class essentially, and so they don't want them hanging out here. Like essentially, if you try to position them like directly where you think demand is going to be, I don't think that would work out very well. Like I think you need to have some place for them to stay in order to improve your partner experience. I think this being said, a lot of our jobs are not completed, and like there's essentially 2 types of transport. There's hub to home and then home to home. And as you scale throughput at a hub, what happens is you have a lot fewer hub to home or home to hub like essentially transportation legs, and then you end up with more and more and more home to home. And then that's where demand density comes in, where essentially like if you penetrate a society really well, what can happen is like there's like 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 workers that are spending their entire day servicing homes in that society, going from home to home. And so I'd say like over time, the goal is very few people are actually at the hub unless there's like low demand that day, and so you end up with a lot of home to home transportation legs. And we've already started seeing that. Like there are some hubs that some of our hubs that if you go to any given time, there's nobody there, but everyone's just going home to home.
What would you say are the metrics that you're keeping a close eye on to ensure that everything is running smoothly, right? Like I guess maybe a better question, what's the one thing that you're paying attention to, whether you're checking it on your phone or you're at HQ and you're just watching this one number?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I'd say here. Is like basically just like what % of bookings are being fulfilled on time. I'd say like quality, like the like quality of service is not something we've had a ton of issues. At least it's not like some sort of like, maybe you'll get like one complaint about it every 3, 4, 5 days. But I think the last mile is where you see a lot more issues. At least in our ops, our last mile is what needs most work. And therefore, what I spend the most time tracking is like what % of bookings are being fulfilled on time. And like that's the like, or rather, what % of bookings are not being fulfilled on time is the KPI.
Got it. What would you say, again, things are heating up a little bit in the space. And so I just want to know what would you say is Pronto's differentiation? Like why would I choose Pronto over any of the other offerings in this category?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple things to say here. One is like we have a different pricing model that's very much like value based, which is to say, you don't want someone to come over to your house just for like just a chill, right? So like, why did you call them over? You had some sort of objective, and therefore you price based on the objective. And I think that like that is the non-intuitive choice for a lot of the companies in the space. It's what we've gone with at least so far, because I think in the short term it can be like a barrier for someone to try it, but like after the second, third, fourth time, they realize that like, oh, actually this is like the much more like customer friendly way to price, because it's objective, it's very value based, people know what they're getting, and that's really important to us. I think the other thing is like over time, like there's a lot of other things that we're going to do to kind of make stickiness happen. And the other thing is like we offer recurring services, so you can book every day at 8 a.m. or you can book Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays at 7 p.m. right? And so like that recurring service is, first of all, super hard to pull off, because we're going to try and send the same person every day if we can, or provided that person is available and working, but that's really difficult to pull off, and very much like something we do that no one else does. And there's other like smaller value adds, like we show up with a kit, and so you don't have to worry about anything. Like we have everything that all the supplies and like cleaning equipment that one could ask for, and or would be required to do the service, and therefore you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to stand with them and say, hey, like use this broom and do that, and like use this cloth to do that. Like the person's coming in with all the equipment. You don't have to worry about anything. You just tell them, or they see on the app what to do, and that's it. And so I think broadly, it's like a higher level of just like zero hassle that we strive for. But I think long term, like why would someone choose any platform? Like why do you use Blinkit versus Instamart versus any other player? Like I use Blinkit because Blinkit delivers the fastest, and I don't have issues with their quality, and therefore like Blinkit wins long term in my mind. And like I think that's how you win long term, is just quality, safety, reliability, and being the best at it. And I think that's why that's why I use Blinkit.
Yeah. Going back to what we talked about earlier, I think today was an eye-opening moment where I'm like, I think I prefer this. I think I prefer something reaching me versus getting canceled 15 minutes in. So speaking about competition, have there been moments in the journey so far where you kind of had to do things that you wouldn't otherwise have done because of competition? Or has it just been kind of like block the competition out and just do what we're here to do?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever changed our strategy as a result of competition. I think like this is a 99.99999% greenfield market, and ultimately what I'm focused on is building it as a category, building the market, and like being the best version of Pronto that we can be, rather than focus on stealing incremental share, which that doesn't make sense. On any given day, 15, 16,000 people total are going to be using one of these services versus millions and millions and millions of people who could be in the potential market. In my head, it doesn't really make sense to focus on stealing 500 of someone else's, like a few thousand, right? Instead, I should just focus on acquiring those 500 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people in the greenfield market.
Fair. Now, in terms of pricing, you mentioned that you are trying to price Pronto at a very value conscious amount of money for your customers, and so I think the challenge there is that how do you then also...
I would clarify what value means. Value doesn't mean discount. Value means like essentially like value investing, right? Value investing does not mean like that's false. Value investing is buying stocks that are cheap or like below their discounted price. That isn't really what I mean here. It's more of like value based in the sense of like value based care, if that makes sense. As in like essentially the value of the services and like what is the economic or like what is the output of the services is how we price essentially. like we orient our pricing based on what is the output that the customer is going to get from this, right? Like what are the tasks that are going to be completed in their home, and so not necessarily pricing based on discount or like being cheap. So yeah, that's what I meant by value.
Got it. But I do think your pricing is competitive. I mean, I opened the app up and I don't think it's available. Pronto is available in my area right now. But I looked at the pricing and it felt super reasonable. I was like, wow, this is like extremely affordable. Like I could actually use Pronto and save money versus having someone who's like doing it on a daily basis just from my neighborhood, right? Some random helper or cleaner. So how do you balance that with also fulfilling your mission of trying to actually give these professionals that are working on your platform a fair and maybe even generous livelihood so that they can sustain themselves and also thrive? Like that's a very hard thing to do. And I also feel like too, being venture backed, the more you go down this road, right, there could potentially be more and more pressure to like squeeze as much value out of your the people on your platform to increase your margins and invest that money elsewhere to continue growing as fast as possible. Growth at any cost, right? That ends up becoming the mantra. And then the workers, it's like, okay, how far can we push them before they break, right? I see it happening like so often. And so to hear from you that your mission is to actually serve both sides, right? Not just the customer, but also the worker, the supply side. What would you say to people that say that's sort of idealistic?
Yeah, I'd say one is that if it's super cheap, we change our pricing based on like locality, essentially. So if it was super cheap to you, then probably those prices would be higher where you live. But the second thing I'd say is that I don't think it's an impossible ask to give someone a really great standard of living and a really great, essentially earnings per hour or really not even earnings per hour, right? Like earnings per month with like reasonable working hours. Like I think it's not impossible to ask for that plus, be gross margin positive. I think, or like be profitable. I'd say I've spent a lot of time on the unit econ and don't know, like I think about it all the time. And I think that I've yet to feel like we are going to be in a position where we have to trade off one side versus the other in order to make the unit econ work, or be in a position where we decide to say like screw the unit econ. I don't feel that way.
What's the repeat customer rate for Pronto? How many people are coming back to use the platform?
It's very high. I won't say the exact number, but it's high.
That's fair. So the thing that people are talking about now, and they've been talking about it since, I guess, like 2023, probably, or maybe even late 2022, is this instant gratification. This is the behavior unlock that's happening here in India, probably actually not in that many other places around the world. Like India is somewhat unique. Maybe China, they're seeing something similar. Maybe a couple of countries in Asia, but like it's incredible how fast things are getting done and how accustomed people are to that new reality. What do you think, if you had to sort of predict the future, what might be the next big behavioral shift that we'll see in this space for the consumer?
What do you mean by this space?
I guess any industry that is that could be impacted by the instant delivery model, right? I know you're not really delivering things, but the instant fulfillment model.
Yeah, I think that a broader array of services will be available. I think already we see like more and more different categories of goods being delivered in 10 minutes, right? And actually, I am not convinced of that most vertical like goods quick commerce companies would be standalone companies. I think Blinkit can do most of them pretty well, but that's like to be determined. I'm honestly not sure. Like I think that like it's like with behavior changes, I think it takes one person to have like a very like radical idea of like this should exist and people will want this, and most people will tell them like no, like that no one wants that, and then they do it and then turns out people want it. Like even when I started working on this, and I would say like there was no news of any other company doing this at that time. Everyone I spoke to was like, no one wants that. Like no one will want that. And then I started and I was like, oh, actually, like people really do want it. So I think like I would just like, and I so staunchly believed like people really want this. People really want this. People really want this. And this should exist. This will exist. This will exist. And everyone's like, no. Like even my dad, he was like, no. Like this is such a dumb idea. Like no one wants this. So I think like the next big trend will come from someone who has very radical ideas, and it will be something that none of the rest of us will have thought of.
Yeah, great answer. Very hard to predict where the puck is going. Another question I had, you've raised the Series A, you're going to be expanding. Which areas or which cities do you think are going to be the toughest for Pronto to crack? And by the way, are you planning also, sort of part two to this question is, are you planning on making a Pronto a pan-India offering, or is it always going to be sort of selective and sort of tier one?
I think one of the great things about this business is that, if you are living in a tier 4 city, right, or like where there's only one pocket of demand where, let's say, like Blinkit would be able to have a store, right? Blinkit can't open one store in a city because they have to transport physical goods and inventory to that store. And therefore, the unit econ on a store level will always be very poor because the supply chain cost is just like disproportionately high. And therefore, like you can't serve that demand. I think what's great about us is we don't have any like physical inventory. And therefore, our ability to go serve small pockets of demand in like tier 4 cities is very much in the plan, right? So I think like in terms of what the end state looks like, I think we're in a much broader array of cities than your Blinkit or Instamart is in.
Yeah, now that I think about it, that's completely true. And there are people who are doing housekeeping and cleaning in virtually every city in India, even if it's a tier 3 or a tier 4. All you have to go do is basically take that disorganized market and bring it under sort of one umbrella, which is Pronto. So very interesting. Do you think, though, that there will be certain areas or certain cities that are going to be more difficult to enter and break into?
Yeah, I actually think Delhi is like way more difficult than anyone gives it credit for. Which is say like we ran a pilot for 5 days in Delhi, and then like we moved to Gurugram after that because we were like this is so hard. There's so many reasons for this. One is that, and by the way, that was our first pilot, which is in December. One is that demand density is a little bit lower because there's a height restriction on buildings in Delhi, and therefore things are a little bit more spread out. Versus Gurugram has massive societies that are super tall, and therefore like you can build demand density easier. Another thing is no one's from Gurugram, right? Like everyone's from somewhere else. They're here for work. They're corporate. They're like so basically like no one's from here, so no one has ties to say a house help that's worked for them for 15 years, 20 years. Versus in Delhi, that's very much a thing. Or like you might even have like generations of kind of house help that have been working for a family. And so that's one thing you contend with. And then also like the concentration of the target demographic. So like the initial customer set is all like really busy corporate people or a lot of dual income households, or sometimes like retired people, but like they previously worked. And in Delhi, the concentration of that, not the density, but the concentration of that is lower. I mean, density as well, but the concentration of that is lower. And therefore, it's a little bit tougher to crack. I think like in general, people in Delhi are a little bit more tough as customers than in Gurgaon.
That's fair. I have one more sort of just like fun question. And I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to ask you. So this is a fun one. In the States, you can book a cab on Uber, and it could be just like a normal cab with a human driver, or it could be a Waymo, right? Which is a driverless car. The car drives itself. I think in India, we don't really have many examples of this. Like something that I can think of is maybe going into a McDonald's and choosing to tap on the screen instead of going to the front counter, right? But that's sort of a very small example of this. In the future, though, do you see a reality where potentially Pronto is deploying robot cleaners instead of human cleaners?
I love Waymo. I'm a huge Waymo fan. I lived in SF, and it was like I was obsessed. I took it at every opportunity, no matter the price difference. I think it is unlikely in the near to medium term, or at least in the next 2 decades, 3 decades. I think it is unlikely that robo cleaners are a thing. I'd love to see someone make a lot of progress on robotics and make it happen, and at least have a viable product out there. I think it's unlikely because for the same reason that I don't think people would like self-driving cars make sense in India, which is say like the like if you were to amortize the cost of that robo taxi or robo cleaner over the useful life of like, let's say like per number of transactions or like number of rides, number of cleanings, whatever, the cost is going to be significantly higher. And I think that's going to be the case for a long time. I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I would be shocked if this is something that happens in the near to medium term.
Interesting. Yeah, the sort of ticket size is obviously way lower here in India. The usage would also be probably higher. And so you'd have these robots sort of wearing out and dying faster than you can actually recoup the cost of the robot. That makes sense. Are you hiring? I mean, you are hiring, of course. What roles are you hiring for? Just in case there's people who are watching who think, hey, Pronto makes sense to me. I think I'd like to work for a company like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we are hiring a lot in operations, both senior and kind of junior level, more senior level than anything. And then in terms of engineering and product, we are hiring one product person in Gurugram, and then we're hiring a bunch of engineers in Bangalore. So back end and front end, we're very much in the market to be hiring. So reach out if you're interested. On the front end, we are React Native.
Okay. And final question, any book recommendations?
So my favorite book is Slaughterhouse-Five. I don't think very many people in India will have read Slaughterhouse-Five, so I guess that's my recommendation.
Okay. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Anjali. It was great talking to you, and I look forward to using Pronto soon once it's available in my area. But congrats again on the Series A, and yeah, can't wait to see how the story unfolds.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Take care, everybody. I guess I'll see you all tomorrow at 1 p.m. India Standard Time on Thursday.